How do you get from a first draft to a finished one? Find out in this video series continuing with analyzing scenes. Hi, I'm Iris Marsh and I help indie authors with their manuscripts so that they can publish with confidence. I'm back from my maternity leave, so it's been a while since I posted a video, but I can start again, although they probably won't happen in quick succession, probably once a month or so. That's what I'm aiming for at least. So in this video, I'll finally show you how to analyze your scenes in your manuscript and how you can create an action plan so you can write your next draft. Okay, so analyzing scenes. Which elements are important to evaluate when you're analyzing your scenes? So it's first what the characters are literally doing. So this is the action you can observe. Then what the characters want. So what's their goal? And this goal is the reason behind their actions. Then you want to make sure there's a value shift. So how does the scene change from beginning to the end? Then you want to have a look at the scene structure. So the inciting incident, the turning point, the crisis, the climax, and the resolution. Then you can also track word count, the time, the setting, any significant information that's mentioned in the scene, and anything else you'd like to track, such as the progressions within relationships between characters or of magical abilities, stuff like that. So first, you want to ask, what are the characters literally doing? So this is the literal action that you observe. This could be the characters are talking, they're eating, they're walking, they're playing a game, or they're searching for a clue. So for instance, in one of my scenes, what I would write down here is that Nikki and Patricia, two of the characters within the scene, are walking and talking. And for the previous one, well, it's also good to evaluate it within the scene. Once you have all the literal actions of each scene, you can put them underneath each other, and then you can see whether you have several scenes in a row that have similar types of actions. For instance, if you have 3 scenes in a row where characters are eating, that might be a clue that you may want your characters to do something else. Otherwise, it can become a bit boring and repetitive if the characters are eating all the time. So the next thing you want to ask is, what do the characters want? So characters act in a way for a reason. They want something. And this is what drives their actions. And conflict also arises when 2 characters want something different, or when there are obstacles in the way for your main character to get what they want. And you also always want conflict in a scene. So this is important. This is an important thing to look at. So while it's always good to ask this question about your protagonist, it can also be helpful to answer it about the other characters within your scene, so that you can establish whether there is conflict between characters. And if there isn't any conflict between characters, you should at least have conflict between your main character and the outside world, or conflict within their own psyche. So some examples of goals for characters are, they want to convince someone of something, they want to become romantically involved with someone, they want to get forgiveness for something they did, or they want to get rich. And these goals can be just a goal for the scene. So that's what you want to look at. And that goal can also be overarching. But you want to make sure that when you analyze the scene, you pick the goal specific for that scene. And then by the end of the scene, they might progress within that same goal. So for instance, if they want to convince someone, perhaps by the end of the scene, they've given someone reasonable doubt and they're kind of considering it, but they're not quite convinced yet. And then their goal may be overarching over several scenes. So in the next scene, they might still want to convince someone, or in the scene after that. And then they progress within that goal. Or, when they want to become romantically involved, that might take longer than just one scene. But what you want to track is within the scene is whether or not they progress in that goal. So do they achieve that goal? Do they not achieve that goal? Or do they get a bit further with that goal? Or do they experience some setback with that goal? I hope that makes sense. So in the scene example, I have that Nikki wants to discover what's different about Patricia. And this is actually also a goal that she has in several scenes, because she doesn't quite understand what's different about Patricia by the end of the scene. But Patricia actually wants to keep her cards close to her chest. So this also gives the scene some conflict in that Nikki wants something, but Patricia wants something else, right? So Nikki's not going to get the information she wants without really trying. Then, as I said, you want there to be a value shift. Every scene should have a value shift. And if there's not a clear value shift, then the scene doesn't move, right? Scenes are about change, because stories are about change. So there should always be a shift in a value within the scene. Even if it's just a small shift, it should be there. And it should be in some way related to either your main plot or your subplot. So for instance, you can have your character move from being healthy to being hurt, from failure to success, from friends to lovers, enemy to ally, stuff like that. It can also be more internal. These are more external examples. Can also go from happy to sad, for instance, sad to angry, stuff like that. And within my scene example, Nikki moves from being healthy to being hurt physically. With the value shift, you just want to make sure that it's very clear, and the value shift should also be tied to your scene structure. So your turning point, crisis, and climax should revolve around the value shift you choose here. And that's also the next step. You want to evaluate the scene structure. So you identify your inciting incident, your turning point, your crisis, your climax, and your resolution. You can evaluate these by asking the questions you learned in a previous video about story structure. Just to reiterate those questions, these are: does the inciting incident tie to the climax? Is the inciting incident resolved by the end? Does the turning point complicate from the inciting incident? Is the link between the turning point and the crisis strong enough? Do the turning point, crisis, and climax follow a consistent protagonist? And does the resolution tie back to the stakes established within the crisis? So here's an example from my scene. So I have the inciting incident is Nikki feels an electric current moving through her. She feels her powers, and when Patricia brushes past her. Then the turning point is that Nikki touches Patricia and then gets a major headache. And from my scene, I gathered that the crisis is a bit unclear. Like, I couldn't quite grasp what choices she had in that scene after she touches Patricia. And then the climax is that Nikki asks the woman to go to her dad, but in this case it kind of seems irrelevant because the climax didn't actually impact the story. And you want, when a protagonist makes a decision and does something, you want it to affect the outcome. You want it to affect the story. And then the resolution is that Nikki feels weak but okay, but Patricia is still affected. And Nikki then hears Lorene's voice inside her mind. Her dad and Caleb show up to get them back to the house, and Lorene suggests to Nikki that someone is targeting her. So and then I can ask all the questions like, does the inciting incident tie to the climax? And so Nikki feels this electric current coming from Patricia, and the climax is that Nikki asks a woman to go get her dad. And like I said, it doesn't really tie together, right? So I have to come up with something else there. And is the inciting incident resolved at the end? Not yet, but for a scene that's okay, because like we said, while you want a story to be completely resolved by the end, within a scene you can have some questions answered while still having some leftover questions for the rest of the story. So here, by the resolution, we understand that Patricia does have powers and that there's something different about them, but we don't quite yet know what that is. Then, is the link between the turning point and the crisis strong enough? No, because the turning point doesn't really trigger a crisis for Nikki. So that's something that I would have to change. So I would probably change the turning point, right? And does the turning point, crisis, and climax follow consistent protagonists? That is the case. And does the resolution tie back to the stakes established within the crisis? That's also not the case because the crisis is unclear. So as you can see, I now know that I really need to work on my turning point, my crisis, and my climax. That something is missing there. And that I should make sure that Nikki has a choice when she either touches Patricia or does something else. Then for the rest of the scene, you can track the word count, the time, and the setting of the scene, because then you can see whether your scenes are either too long or too short. For instance, if you have a scene that's just 500 words, that might be a bit short. And if you have one that's 4,000, that might be a bit long. Like sometimes it works, but you just have to use your judgment for in that case. And you can check whether your story has a clear and realistic time frame by tracking the time. And it also prevents mistakes. For instance, people going to school on a Saturday, for instance. And it also helps you check whether you have a vivid setting. So that's why I always also track the setting of the scene, so that I know that I create a setting so people are actually grounded within the story. So here's the scene example. The scene was around 1,500 words. I didn't really mention the time. And the setting is a sidewalk and it's outside, but within the scene it's kind of unclear where it is exactly, and there's not much setting description, so I can do a better job at elaborating on that setting and creating a more vivid experience. Then I like to track the significant information that's mentioned, because that helps you keep track of what you've already mentioned, so you don't repeat yourself with information the reader already knows, or mention something that the reader has no clue about yet. So it kind of helps you prevent, plot holes. So in my example, I mentioned that the Crown works as a type of amplifier, and that Nikki reads books to see whether she can find information on people like them, and that Jason and Caleb make the decisions within Patricia's order. And for the rest of the scene, you can track anything else you like. And this could be your character's relationship with others. I like to track this. Or you can track the protagonist's internal worldview shift, or if your character has magical abilities, you can track how they progress in developing them, so that it's a logical progression and they don't, go from barely knowing any magic to being amazing at it, So for instance, I track Nikki's relationships with other characters to make sure they follow a logical progression. And it helps to put that underneath each other for your scenes. And I also track Nikki's attitude toward her powers for a logical progression, because this is what I want to change. It changed by the end. So she starts out with a certain attitude towards her powers, and I want her to end with a different attitude towards her powers. And I want to make sure that that shift is gradual, and not, like she feels a certain way about the powers and then it changes instantly. So what happens when you're done? Once you've finished analyzing your scenes, it's time to create a list of action points. So I like to create a list of action points for each scene. And then I'll work on the scene that needs the most work first, and then move toward the scene with the least amount of work by the end. But you can also just work your way through your scenes in chronological order. So for instance, one action point I had for this scene was to create a clearer crisis. So I need to indicate how Nikki can feel Patricia's power move through her, and if Patricia is some type of amplifier herself, so she could choose to use her powers if she wanted to, right? So that is a choice, but also make it clear beforehand that she's feeling the addiction. So then we have one crisis choice is that she could use her powers, but she might feel the addiction again. And that's then one of the stakes. Or she can choose to rely on the woman to get to her dad instead of using her powers, even though she doesn't know if that woman will get there in time, or if there's anything her dad can do. So that's another one of the choices, and then the stakes for that choice are also clear. And after you've completed your scene analysis and you've rewritten all your scenes, you can move on to the next stage, which is line and copy editing. And we'll discuss more tips and tricks on how you can do your line and copy editing in the next video. Alright, that was it. So if you'd like some more tips on editing, you can sign up for my free self-editing course, where you'll learn more about each stage of editing, including line and copy editing, if you don't want to wait for the next video to drop, and some tips and tricks on how you can do each stage of editing yourself. And you can find the link in the description. And if you want some more information on the types of editing and general self-editing tips, just have a look at some of my other videos. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated for more videos. And in the next video, like I said, we'll talk about line and copy editing. So see you then.